For years, one question hovered over Meghan Markle's royal wedding, like a shadow the palace hoped no one would ever stare at too closely. The world noticed the empty seats. Viewers felt the silence. Commentators whispered about the absence. But Harry himself never spoke about it publicly, at least not in the way people expected. Behind closed doors, among the handful of people he trusted, he finally began to hint that the real reason Meghan's family was missing from the biggest day of her life wasn't drama, wasn't a logistical issue, and wasn't the result of some family feud. According to those who heard him share his frustrations privately, what kept Meghan's relatives away was far more complicated. He described a weight he didn't fully understand until long after the wedding plans had already started, something buried so deeply in Meghan's maternal history that even he struggled to make sense of it. And like every mystery, this one begins in the place no one expected, a single blank space in Meghan Markle's genealogy. Before Meghan became a global figure, before her engagement to Harry, before her story collided with the monarchy, her family tree contained a detail so small that most readers never noticed it. When British newspapers published her genealogy, as they traditionally do with every incoming royal spouse, the charts showed names, birth dates, family connections stretching back generations. Everything was tidy and conventional, except for one thing. Where Doria Ragland's mother's name should have been, the chart showed nothing. Just a line, a void. The kind of omission that simply doesn't happen in documents of that scale. To most casual readers, it looked like an oversight, but to archivists, genealogists, and those familiar with royal vetting procedures, that blank wasn't an error, it was a sign. Royal genealogical reviews are meticulous. Every name matters, every relative matters. Even distant ancestors are usually accounted for. A missing mother, especially the maternal grandmother of a future duchess, is not something that gets skipped. And as researchers compared different sources, a pattern emerged. That missing name didn't appear in just one document. It appeared across several independent records, each time avoiding the same question. Who was Doria's mother? Why did no one, not even seasoned researchers, have access to that information? Why did every historical trail stop cold at the same empty line? The deeper the investigation went, the stranger the silence became. Because a blank space in a family tree is rarely just a blank space. Sometimes it's a wall, built deliberately to keep something else hidden behind it. Months later, the world witnessed one of the most watched weddings of the decade. Windsor Castle shimmered with ceremony and tradition. Meghan, elegant and poised, walked into history. But inside St. George's Chapel, the cameras captured something far more telling than the gown or the vows. They showed an entire section of the bride's side of the chapel completely empty. And in the middle of that emptiness sat one woman, Doria Ragland. No siblings beside her, no cousins behind her. Not a single member of Meghan's extended family filling the rows. Just Doria, alone and almost symbolic, seated directly across from Queen Elizabeth. Insiders later admitted that even members of the royal household were unsettled by the optics. A royal wedding represents unity and the joining of two families. Yet here, half of the narrative was missing. It didn't feel accidental. It didn't look like a simple case of relatives being unavailable. The silence was deliberate. And privately, those familiar with the planning began to whisper that this absence was less about who was invited and more about what could never risk being revealed. Too many relatives, too many conversations, too many curious journalists digging into the wrong branches of Meghan's family tree. Any of these could have brought attention to the one detail the palace wanted to keep quiet, the blank space. 8 months after the wedding, the quiet mystery finally cracked open. In newly surfaced archival documents, the missing name appeared at last. Doria Ragland's mother was identified as Janet Arnold, born September 4, 1929 in Sandusky, Ohio, and passed away in 2000 at the age of 71. At first glance, it looked like a routine correction, a small piece of history restored. But names have power. A single name opens doors. Birth certificates, census records, church logs, burial files. And once Janet's name became visible, her lineage began to unfold in a way no one expected. Not neatly, not cleanly, but in fragments that raised more questions than answers. The records revealed Janet's parents were James T. Arnold and Natalie Nettie Allen, seemingly ordinary individuals from the early 20th century. But as researchers followed the branches upward, they discovered a disturbing anomaly. Both James and Nettie shared the same mother, a woman named Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler. The same birth records, the same maternal identity, the same history. According to archival interpretations, this suggested that Janet's parents were half-siblings, not distant cousins, not a vague familial connection, two individuals who shared a mother. It was the implication the historical documents pointed towards repeatedly, and suddenly the decades-long omission made sense. The missing name wasn't a mistake, it was protection. Researchers have long known that in many families, especially navigating social stigma and earlier generations, sensitive histories were erased in silence rather than exposed. But when such a lineage intersects with the British monarchy, the implications shift dramatically. Rumors circulated among staff that once the findings reached palace advisors, the tone around Meghan's family tree changed instantly. Vetting didn't raise simple concerns, it raised red flags. Not about Meghan or Doria themselves, but about the optics and potential media frenzy surrounding Janet's origins. No royal household wants headlines speculating about taboo ancestral connections. The advisors allegedly offered calm, clinical explanations of what the public reaction might be if the details came out. And their strategy reflected that fear. Include only Doria, minimize attention on extended relatives, and avoid reintroducing people whose presence might invite curiosity, and quietly keep the mother's lineage unspoken. Whether this decision was protective or self-preserving depends on who you ask. But those close to the situation claim the palace preferred an empty row over an unpredictable one. And while the monarchy controlled the optics, Meghan and Doria carried the emotional burden. Their public relationship has always seemed carefully curated, not strained, but selective, intentional, as if they learned long ago that silence can be safer than openness. Doria's presence in Meghan's life remains gentle but distant. She appears only in brief, perfectly timed moments. The wedding car ride, a documentary cameo, a quiet visit. Then she returns to the privacy she has held tightly for decades. It's unusual for the mother of a global figure to remain so invisible, but for Doria, invisibility may have been both a shield and a survival tactic. Observers have pointed out the same pattern in Meghan's relationship with her wider American family. Closeness is rare, distance is typical. Not coldness, but boundaries, heavy, purposeful boundaries that suggest reopening those connections risks reopening the very past they've spent years keeping sealed. The alleged revelations surrounding Janet Arnold's origins aren't Meghan's fault. They aren't Doria's fault. No one chooses the circumstances of their ancestors, but a legacy can cast shadows long after the people who lived it are gone. And that shadow reached Windsor Castle. When the camera swept across St. George's Chapel, the world saw romance and history. What they missed was the quiet row behind Doria that told the real story. That vacancy wasn't just about who wasn't invited. It reflected a century of silence passed down through generations. From Janet's missing name to James and Nettie's overlapping maternal line, to Gertrude Sadler appearing twice where she should have appeared once, to every document where the maternal branch was erased, the absence stretched deeper than the wedding. It was woven into the family's past long before Meghan was born. And when Harry finally let himself speak about it privately, he didn't describe drama or conflict. He described complexity he was still trying to understand, a pressure he didn't know how to navigate, a past Meghan never asked for but nevertheless carried. Because the blank space wasn't just a missing name. It was a wound the family had never healed, a story they had survived by burying. The palace could control the seating chart, they could remove names from genealogical charts, they could limit visibility, but they couldn't rewrite a history set